At Center 2, you're going to work on this idea of identifying the type of sentence, simple, compound, complex, and then we're going to get a little into compound and complex sentences. You did a pretest earlier this week, earlier this week you did a pretest on simple, compound, and complex sentences. So in this center, we're going to talk about some easy, simple text clues that you can use to find the different types. Now, the things that I'm going to show you, though, you have to actually do. It's going to take a little bit of time, the highlighting, the labeling. And if you get in the habit of doing this, it should make it a lot easier for you to find the different sentence types. So at your center, you should have a green handout that looks like this paper, a white handout that you're going to use in a little while where you're going to cut them out and glue them on the back. You should have a pair of scissors, a bottle of glue, a highlighter, and something to write with. So if you don't have those right now, why don't you pause this and go get them. So I want you to use the highlighter. Anything that you see me labeling on this paper, anything that you see me writing is what you should have on your paper when you go to turn it in. All right? So we're going to start with looking at simple sentences. In our text clue for a simple sentence, what do we look for? We're really just looking for one subject plus one verb. And we have talked many times about phrases and the different ways phrases can be added to sentences. And we did this to show you that just because there are a bunch of phrases in a sentence doesn't mean that the basic part of it, what's left, is just one subject and one verb. And so that makes it a simple sentence. So if you look at your example sentence here, it says, in California, gold could be found in rivers. The first thing we want to do is get rid of any of our extras. So I see in California, I see in rivers, and so I got rid of the extra information, and all I'm left with is gold could be found. So now I'm going to look for my subject. What's the sentence talking about? Well, the only noun that's left there is gold. And what is it saying about gold? Gold could be found, and together there's my verb. Subject plus verb with a couple of different phrases in there. For a compound sentence, our text clue, what we're going to be looking for is a comma with a fanboy. And if you don't remember your fanboys, you have them written on the first page of your interactive notebook. Okay? And with a fanboy, if you see a comma with it, then that's a hint to you that you should start looking to see if there's a subject and a verb on this side and a subject and a verb on this side. And so what I'm going to ask you to do when you find or when you see something, when you see a comma fanboy, is to circle it. That's your clue. And I'm having you do that because just because you see a comma fanboy doesn't mean it's a compound sentence. You have to look to see if there's a subject and a verb on both sides. So let's go back to our sentence. In California, gold could be found in rivers, and everyone wanted some to get rich. Well, I see right now a comma fanboy, so I'm going to circle it. That's my first indication that this could be a compound sentence, but I don't know yet until I go through my process. So I'm going to highlight my phrases and get rid of them. In California, in rivers, and I see an infinitive. So let's see, my infinitive, to get. So I'm going to look on the left side of the comma and I'm left with gold could be found, which was my first sentence there. Gold could be found. And then on the right side of the comma I want to see if there's another subject and a verb. And I see everyone wanted some. I don't need to read the to get. I know that that's an infinitive. It's already got a job, so I can ignore it. Everyone is the subject and wanted is the verb. So since I see a subject and a verb on both sides of the comma fanboy, I know I have a compound sentence. Complex sentence, just like its name, starting to get a little bit more complicated. For our complex sentences, we're going to look for an awubis. And at your center on the poster on the whiteboard, I have the awubis list. An awubis has to be followed by a subject and a verb to make it a dependent clause. And this is how I'm going to ask you to code them. I want you, when you find a word that you think is an awubis, to kind of draw a little cloud around it and then a squiggly line underneath it. Awubis with your subject and your verb. If you can find one of these in your sentence, that means you have a complex sentence. If your woobus is at the beginning of the sentence with the subject and the verb, just like a prepositional phrase, you need to put a comma after it. But if it's in the middle or the end, you don't. So looking at my example sentence, because gold was found in rivers, many people flocked to California. So I'm going to do my same process, look for any phrases. I see in rivers, I see to California. I did have to stop and think about to California for a second because to can also be an infinitive, but I know that California is a noun, so that had to be a prepositional phrase. Now I want to look to see, do I see an awoobus? And I do, because. So I'm going to draw my little cloud around it. Because what? Because gold was found, and this whole thing all the way to the comma is my dependent clause. Because gold was found in rivers, many people flocked to California. The main subject here is people and flocked. I want to check to see that my dependent clause has a subject and a verb as well. Because gold was found in rivers. Gold is the subject there, and was is my verb, or was found. Now compound and complex, you're going to take both the idea of a compound sentence and a complex sentence and put them together. So you're going to look for an awoobus with a subject and a verb, and you're going to look for a comma fanboy with a subject and a verb on both sides. So in California is a prep phrase. In rivers is a prep phrase. To get is my infinitive. And I see my so I'm going to circle it. That tells me I could have a subject and a verb on both sides. And I see an awoobus. Let's use a different color. I see if. So I'm going to draw my little cloud around it. If what? If you wanted to get rich. So the main part of the sentence then is gold could be found. Gold is the subject. Could be found is my verb. On the other side, I see you made the long trip. You is the subject and made is the verb. So in this case, we had an awoobus, if, with a subject and a verb after it, you wanted. And then we also had a comma fanboy that had a subject and a verb on both sides. So that made it a compound, complex sentence. So when we look at text clues, this is what I want you to be focused on. A subject and a verb, the comma fanboy, the awoobus, and whether those ideas are put together. So let's try a couple sentences before you have to do this on your own. The first sentence says, the frustrated child finally understood the difficult math problem. Well, if I look at my text clue up there, I'm looking, can I rule out a compound sentence? Because I don't see a comma fanboy, I know it's not going to be compound. Can I rule out a complex sentence? I don't see an awoobus in here, and I could go word by word, looking at the awoobus list on the board or in my notebook, and I don't see an awoobus in there, which means it's definitely not going to be compound complex. So let's see if I can find my subject and the verb. The frustrated child finally understood the difficult math problem. What's the sentence talking about? It's a child. And what did the child do? It understood. Okay, so that makes this a simple sentence. Looking at the next one. Although the dance started late, I had a good time. I don't see any prepositional phrases or infinitives, so the next thing I want to look for is, do I see a comma fanboy? Well, I see a comma here, but I is after it. And if I looked at my list of fanboys, I is not a fanboy. So right away, I can tell this is not a compound sentence. So now I want to look, do I see an awoobus? Although is an awoobus, so we're going to put our little cloud around it. And I want to think of, where does that clause end? Although what? Although the dance started late. I want to double check, is that really a clause? Because if it is, it should have a subject and a verb. The dance started. So I see a complex sentence. Jody has leftovers because I brought them to her yesterday. First, I'm going to look for any prepositional phrases, and I do see one. To her is a prep phrase. I'm going to look to see, do I see a comma fanboy? And I do not. There's no comma in here at all, so I can rule out a compound sentence. Now I'm going to look at my awubis list to see if I can find an awubis. And I see because, draw my cloud, because what? Because I brought them to her yesterday. If I take that part of the sentence out, I'm left with Jody has leftovers, and it expresses a complete thought by itself. Clauses are like phrases. They don't have to be there, or dependent clauses. Okay, so this is a complex. I'll tell her the assignment when I see her in class. Look for my prep phrases, and I do see one in class. I don't see a comma fanboy in here. I don't see a comma at all. So I know this can't be a compound sentence. So now I want to look to see if I can find an awubis. And I do see one. When. I'm going to draw my cloud around it. When what? When I see her in class. If I take that clause out of there, I'm left with I'll tell her the assignment. Okay, so I can tell that that is complex. And I did skip a little step here. I should be making sure that this clause has a subject and verb, I and see, I and brought, because sometimes a prepositional phrase can look like a dependent clause. So you really got to double check to make sure that that subject and verb is in there. While Casey stirred the sauce, I made garlic bread, and Caleb cooked the noodles. Well, I see a lot of punctuation going on in here. The first thing that stands out to me is I see a comma and. If I see a comma and, that's the first indication that I've got a compound sentence. I want to see if there's a subject and a verb on both sides. Well, the other thing I notice over here is an awubis. So I'm going to draw my cloud around it. While Casey stirred the sauce, Casey's a subject, stirred the sauce. I could get rid of that and I'd be left with I made garlic bread and Caleb cooked the noodles. I am the subject. What did I do? I made. On the other side of the comma and, I see Caleb is the subject. What did Caleb do? He cooked. So I have a compound and a complex sentence. Whoops. And the last one. The weather is beautiful today, so I'll take a walk. Oh, that's not my last one, sorry. The weather's beautiful today, so I'll take a walk. Look to see my text clue. I see that comma so, that's a fanboy. So I want to see, is there a subject and a verb on both sides? Weather's a subject, the weather is. I'll take a walk, I am the subject, and will take is a verb. So I see a compound sentence. All right, now the last one. Kelly is excited for school, but Gina would rather stay home. Look for a prep phrase. I see one right away. For school. Get rid of that. I see a comma on there. So I want to see, is there a comma with a fanboy? And there is, comma but. So if this is a compound sentence, I have to find a subject and a verb on both sides. Kelly is excited. Kelly's the subject. Is the verb. Gina would rather stay home. Gina's the subject. Gina would stay is my verb. So that's a compound sentence as well. So this coding that you see at the top of this paper, what you've just done, is what your paper is going to look like here in a few minutes. You're going to get out the sentence parts that are cut in the little squares that can fit in here, and you're going to fill in your text clues from the other side. For example, a subject and a verb. You're going to just copy them from the other side. And then as you look at each sentence, you're going to code them the way that we just did this. And if you need to watch it again, you always can go back and watch the screencast. If you don't finish this, this is your homework. And if you do finish it, turn it in, and then you can go work on your 7 Wonders research.